Welcome back to Ground School 101, kayaking, learning how to kayak. The next segment I want to talk to you about is your paddle. Now, when I first started, I didn't have the money to get a nice paddle. So what I ended up doing is I ended up laminating two canoe paddles with fiberglass, binding them together, and I had my stick. I paddled with that thing for probably 7 years when I first started kayaking before I cracked it. And then I got another paddle, and I actually won it at a kayaking rodeo on the Trinity River in California. Not because I won, but because I at least placed, and it qualified me to pick from the grab pile at the end of the competition. So I picked the paddle. But as the years have gone by, I've tried quite a few paddles. Some of the first paddles that I paddled with were lightning paddles, and they were great, but they had a flat blade. And I have an old one here, and you can see how flat that blade is. This is an old lightning paddle. And I ended up, after years, I needed a spare paddle that I could put in my boat. So I turned this paddle, which at the time had a 90-degree offset, which means the blade behind me was set 90 degrees from this blade. So what that did was, as you were paddling, you had to turn your wrist quite far to get that other paddle in the correct position. And every time you took a stroke, you were twisting your wrist to offset that 90 degrees to get that paddle in that stroking position. And that gets tough after a while. But I eventually broke this paddle down to a breakdown so I could stick it in the back of my kayak. And it wasn't designed as a breakdown. What I did was I sawed it in half. I pirated pieces of aluminum attachments from a pair of old crutches, I think an old shower stool. Steal one from your grandma if she's not using it, and take all the pieces out of it, and you can build yourself a breakdown paddle. And the reason I suggest that is just being frugal, because some breakdown paddles that are made cost you anywhere from 200 plus to $500-600, depending on who the manufacturer is and how many times it breaks down. So this was just a cheap and easy way, fast, to get me a breakdown paddle. As the years went by, I ended up getting another one. This is made by Warner, and it's a little long, but it fits in my big boat, and it breaks in two pieces. It has two offsets here, but I tend to use it, whether you're right-handed or left, on the front button. So you can set it on the back button if you're left-handed, front button if you're right-handed. And on your paddles, you want to make sure this is not perfectly round. There's a little part here that's kind of squashed, and as you grip it with your hand, you can feel the out of round that it is. And that's designed to fit your hand better. And it's called an indicator. And what that does is you have a control hand, whether you're left or right-handed. You have a control hand, and that hand locks onto your paddle. As you're paddling and you rotate, this other hand will let the paddle slide. So as you paddle, as you reset the angle of that blade, you'll let your other hand slide. As you get better, you'll slide your hands all over these things. But this one is, I think, set at a 35. So when this is straight up and down, might be a 30. This back blade, as you can see, is slanted at about 30 degrees offset of this. So you still have to rotate your hand just a little, but not much. And it's pretty comfortable. And 30, 25, 30, 35, it's a good comfortable position. And we'll get into all that stuff down the road when we actually start paddling as to why that's important. But this is another inexpensive breakdown, two pieces done by Warner Paddles, and just part of the collection. I like this paddle. This is a Warner Powerhouse. Now I love paddling this with this boat because it's got a bigger blade surface here, and it's got a lot of power. But as you can see, this is different than the lightning paddle. As you can see, that blade is convected. It's more like a wing. Now what this does is when you take a stroke and that blade is moving through the water, it produces a lot of power as you're pulling, versus the lightning paddle, which is completely flat. When you really want to pull hard, the end of that blade as it's pulling through the water will shimmy and you lose a lot of power. And this, you can kind of cup the water as you reach forward. You can see that curve on it. You can kind of cup the water and draw that power, and you don't even have to have the blade 100% in the water to maximize the power too. It can be, 3/4 of the way in the water or less, and you can still get a good purchase on the water. So you really want a good paddle. Your paddle is your hand connected to the water. When you're paddling downriver, this thing needs to be in constant motion, doing something. It never needs to be sitting there static unless you're just chit-chatting with your friends in flat water. But when you're in moving water and you need to do something, this paddle needs to be touching the water. What that does, information of what the river is doing underneath your boat, it's transferred through this paddle to your hand, to your brain. It tells you everything you need to know what's happening immediately around your boat. And you can adjust, make your strokes, be ready to do your sweeps and your rudders and your low brace and your high braces, and whatever you need to do, the paddle's always ready and ready to go. So keep it in motion, keep it in play. Don't ever sit there and go down a rapid and you come over a little wave hole and drop and you go whee, and you hit the hole and your paddle's up here to hit you in the nose, or down here doing nothing, and your boat's at the mercy of the water. Engage that water. Remember, this is your hand. This is your sensory perception, your connection to the water. Don't dismiss it as it's just my paddle. This is your connection to the water, and it tells you what the water's doing through the feedback that you get through this paddle into your hands. Tells your brain, without even thinking about it, what I need to do. So keep that in mind. Get a good paddle. I don't know what's going on with the COVID stuff. Kayaking equipment is hard to find. Supplies are limited. These paddles, run you anywhere from $235 to $500 or whatever. I don't know what they are now. I tend to hang on to my paddles till I absolutely wear them out or break them. Once in a blue moon, I'll give one away. Anyway, welcome. And this Kayaking 101 Ground School. I'm George Williams. I'll talk to you later.